Carlos Alcaraz is the king of Rome. Welcome back to the channel, guys. Carlos Alcaraz has just beaten Jannik Sinner 7-6, 6-1 to extend his head-to-head with the Italian to 7-4. But not just that, he's also won his first Rome Open title, and that means he's now won all 4 of the big clay court titles in the season. He won Monte Carlo this year, Rome this year, of course, and he's won Madrid 2 times prior to this year, on top of winning Roland Garros last year as well. So he's now completed the big title list anyway on clay, and that's a milestone for him, of course. On top of that, it's his 7th ATP Masters title, which is incredible for someone of his age. Alcaraz also snapped Sinner's 26-match winning streak, which dated back to October of 2024 when Alcaraz beat him in the Beijing final. So clearly Alcaraz a thorn in Jannik Sinner's side right now. Sinner was aiming to become the first Italian man to win the Rome Masters since Adriano Panetta in 1976. And Alcaraz is actually, interestingly, the first player to win 3 ATP Tour titles this year so far, after winning Rotterdam, Monte Carlo, and now Rome. What I will also say, and we talked about Monte Carlo, Madrid, and Rome, while he's now the 5th man to win all 3 of those ATP Masters 1000 events, and he joins an exclusive club of, yes, you guessed it, Rafael Nadal, Novak Djokovic, Gustavo Kuerten, and Marcelo Rios. Look, this was a match that went kind of how I thought it would. But I think Carlos played better than I expected. I think maybe Jannik showed a bit more rustiness than I was also expecting. So I had picked Carlos to win in 3 sets. In the end, he got it done in 2. That first set was pivotal. And what I'm going to very briefly do is give a quick blurb on the first and second sets. And I'm going to point out some of the pressing points throughout the match. Some, what I would say, the most important factors throughout the match that I thought had the biggest impact in the outcome. The first set was tight and competitive. I don't think there's any question about that. Sinner was 40-15 up on Carlos's serve at 6-5 up in the first set. It was his first tournament after a 3-month doping ban, and this run was phenomenal to say the least, given the circumstances. Carlos saved those break points, held his nerve, eventually took that game and took the tiebreaker 7-5 after taking a 3-0 lead. Then the second set was just plain sailing for Alcaraz, dominated it completely, took a 5-0 lead. Sinner, I think, deteriorated physically, if I'm being honest, and the level also dipped. And in the end, Carlos just dominated him in that second set and took it easily 6-1 to breadstick the Italian. And he would have been, I'm sure, disappointed with the second set Sinner, but I think it was just too soon. I would say just too soon for the Italian. 3 months out of the game, first tournament back against the best clay courter on the planet at the moment. Yeah, it's not an easy thing for even someone of Jannik's stature to overcome in such a short period of time. So let's very briefly touch, well, not briefly, let's go into detail on the major factors. So first of all, I want to touch upon the 6-5, 40-15 scenario where Jannik had the 2 set points in set 1. 2 break and set points, of course. So point 1, Alcaraz goes out wide with the serve, which is into Sinner's hitting zone on the forehand. And he drags that forehand return into the net, Jannik, trying to go middle. So bear with me. We'll talk about point 2, then I'll talk about both points collectively even. Point 2, they get into an ad court rally. This is after a kick serve out wide from the ad court from Carlos. They're trading backhand to backhand. Carlos then opens up on the InterOut Forehand. Sinner tries to change direction on the backhand 2 meters behind the baseline off a very deep InterOut forehand from Carlos. And what was interesting about this is that was Carlos's second InterOut forehand, and the first one he hit, Carlos was mid-air, trying to take it out the air, 2 meters behind the baseline, going cross-court. Then he thinks, okay, this next forehand's even deeper, let me do the same, but try and change direction and go line. So he ends up hitting it, as I said, mid-air, whilst attempting to go line, and he drags it wide. This is a really tough shot to hit, even for someone as talented as Jannik. I think for anyone on tour, given the ball that he received and then what he was trying to do from that position, it was a really low percentage shot. I think both those points showed an element of rustiness. They're 2 mistakes that I could easily see him not making if he hadn't had the 3-month layoff. And maybe forget about the 3-month layoff. I think they're 2 mistakes that maybe we wouldn't be accustomed to see him make, especially consecutively anyway. I think he can make one of those mistakes, but to make those mistakes consecutively in such a clutch or clinical important moment of the set and then ultimately the match, I think is very unlike him. Very unlike the Sinner that we're used to seeing since the start of 2024. And that to me was, that game was the turning point in the match. I think once he didn't break the tiebreak, Alcaraz took confidence from holding, and then he ran with that momentum. And then Jannik, I think, deteriorated a little bit physically because he just didn't have the legs. Because he hasn't played for a while, and Alcaraz is a level above anyone he's faced in this tournament in terms of physicality. And he generally struggles with Alcaraz's physicality anyway, and it would have been even more so given that he's been out for so long. And I say so long after, whatever it is, 3 months. Because the intensity that Carlos brings to the court is second to none compared to the rest of the players on tour right now. If Rafa was on tour still, I'd say him, but there is no one else like him on tour. So, other points to note. The ad court exchange was very interesting, and I talked about it in my preview. That on a fast hard court or on grass courts, I think Sinner has more of an advantage in those exchanges than he would do on a slow clay court. Carlos is a better clay court player than Jannik. He has the tools to be more successful because he has better variety and he doesn't just play at one pace. And that ultimately is what Jannik did in this final. It's part of what makes him a great hardcore player because he's very precise, he hits an incredibly big ball, and he's got great athleticism. He's got great defensive capabilities on both wings as well. Serve returns up there. He's a great all-round player. But one thing that he does lack, I think, is really effective variety. And when I'm talking about variety, I'm not saying that he doesn't have more than a couple of tools in his bag, but what I'm saying is that on a clay court, Alcaraz is just a level above when it comes to creativity. Sinner was playing at one pace throughout this whole final, and with Carlos, if you look, for example, at the ad court exchanges at any of the rallies, you will notice there's a trend. Carlos hits so many different types of balls. If we're just focusing on the backhand to backhand, Jannik hits almost the same backhand every time. You won't see him hit many different types of pace or trajectory. Depth, maybe an angle, yeah, depth and angle. But apart from that, you're not going to see much else from him, in my opinion. That's what I saw anyway in today's final. For Alcaraz, he will hit a backhand lob. He'll hit a backhand slice. He'll also hit angles and depth, but the backhand lob put him in really good stead because he hit really deep backhand lobs, a lot of spin. It pushed Sinner back. It gave Carlos the opportunity to set up the forehand in that ad court and go into in or into out with that forehand. And when he went into in, he would hit either go flat and hard into that corner, or he'd hit with beautiful depth with a lot of spin to just dip into that forehand corner and force Sinner to have to hit an awkward forehand on the run. Because what Sinner's really good at doing is being able to hit forehands on the run where it almost sits up for him a little bit and he's able to slap through the ball. With the amount of depth that Carlos was able to find on that in-twin forehand, for example, with that amount of spin and that amount of height over the net, it just meant that Sinner couldn't hit one of his favourite shots, the running forehand on the line, as effectively as he would have liked. What it also meant is that the creativity from Carlos in that corner meant that he defended that corner so well. And the ad court exchange is really important, in my opinion, for most elite matchups on tour. And Alcaraz, because he defended that corner so well, Sinner wasn't able to really enact much damage in those exchanges, and that ultimately meant that he paid a price. I guess we can follow this up by talking about Carlos's variety. And we talked about the backhand lob, and that's definitely part of it. And, you can say, oh, it's easy, just hit a backhand lob, Easily said than done, or easier said than done, because it's not just about hitting a backhand lob. He was hitting, and I think maybe backhand lob isn't the right word for it, because these were backhands that just had a lot of height and spin, but they were deliberate ploys to try and push Jannik back and also give him different looks, ensure that he wasn't able to get into rhythm and just start bludgeoning the ball back at Alcaraz, right? Alcaraz didn't want to get into a shootout with Jannik because he knew that, look, Sinner has more power than me. If we're just talking about raw ball hitting ability, who can hit the ball cleaner, if we're going toe-to-toe, he knows Jannik is going to cause him big issues. So what does he need to do? Try and get him off balance. Make sure that he's not in rhythm. And that's what he did with his variety. The drop shot is utilised really effectively as well. I think Jannik is moving well, but not moving as well as his peak level, I think maybe, potentially. Let me know what you think in the comments, whether I'm just pretending to see that, or maybe it's a placebo of Alcaraz beating him so convincingly, or do you think you actually see that too? I think he's still moving well, but I don't think he's been defending as well. I think I've seen some tendencies that we would have seen pre-2024 from Sinner throughout this fortnight. And when I talk about tendencies from before 2024, I'm not talking about good tendencies, I'm talking about bad tendencies. And one is when he's defending, to get impatient and try and go line early and then end up making mistakes. That's not something that he was doing very often from 2024 onwards. And it meant that he became extremely consistent, and at times he would be almost quote unquote boring to watch, because he might, rather than going line early or taking that risk, he would end up exchanging down the middle of the court with depth and big ball hitting, and then try and change direction when it was the most, not convenient, but the most comfortable for him, and is the highest percentage shot. And I don't think maybe he played high percentage tennis, or has done, especially in this final, but throughout maybe the 2 weeks. Not as high percentage tennis as we're used to seeing from him. So the drop shot was effective from Carlos as well, did well at the net. I think he had a lot of success when he was utilising that ploy, and he chose his moments well. He's very clinical, I think, throughout this whole final, and clearly was up for the task and rose to the level. As I mentioned in the preview, that he rises to the occasion when he plays the best players on tour. One thing as well that I wanted to note, I guess a last point, is on the second serve of Carlos. I think Jannik didn't do enough. He didn't really inflict any damage really on the second serve, and it just wasn't being attacked efficiently. I think maybe Jannik should have stood a bit further back. Carlos has got a big kick serve, especially on second serve. Jannik was a lot of the time having to return this by jumping and then returning mid-air. It didn't look super comfortable. It looked like the kind of struggles that we've seen from Novak in the past with Carlos's kick serve, and it just looked awkward for Jannik, and that's something for him to look at, I think, post-match and try and adjust if they play again, for example, at Roland Garros. I think he needs to be smarter with return positions and make sure that he's giving himself the best possible chance to make effective returns, because yeah, it wasn't, to me, he just was not returning as well as he should have, and he is such a phenomenal returner, Jannik. So this is where a bit of problem solving is needed, and he needs to adjust his return position, see what works. That wasn't really the case today. Carlos managed to utilize a really deep return position well today, and can I just say, some of the athleticism that we saw from him was just phenomenal. Some of the points where he had no right to win, he was somehow winning. I mean, I was watching the match and there were some points where I was just thinking, Sinner's come to the net, he's volleyed, and no way Carlos is getting that. He's on all the way over the other side of the court and somehow he gets there. There was a point where he lobs Sinner and then Sinner tries to hit it over his shoulder and misses. And I mean, Carlos had no right to win that point. Honestly, no right. And I think we have to give a lot of kudos and praise to Carlos, because yes, Jannik has been out for 3 months, so maybe it's not the best Jannik, but the way that Carlos played this match, how clinical he was, and just the way that he approached it tactically, I thought was spot on. And the biggest thing for him is the mental side of things. I think mentality is huge in this sport, and he has a phenomenal mentality. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening as well. If you are listening on a podcast platform, do give us a follow. If you're listening on a podcast platform, do subscribe if you're new, and also do leave a rating or review if you're listening on a podcast platform. I appreciate each and every one of you. Do consider becoming a member to get some cool perks on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, and we'll see you on the next video.